Welcome to the Human 2 podcast, the podcast that investigates the human side of the accountancy and finance profession. After all, accountants are human too. I'm Hannah, founder of Accountancy Hub and director of Human 2 Limited. I'm also an ICAW chartered accountant. Today's episode is with Digital Education Delivery Lead at ACCA, Krutika Adatia. Krutika is a chartered accountant and spent a number of years as a tutor at Kaplan before moving to the ACCA to lead digital education delivery. There, she hosted the ACCA podcast On Your Marks, which inspired her to establish her own podcast, Journeys with Krutika. This is a brilliant podcast which shines a light on the extraordinary journeys of everyday people, not just the ones with huge platforms or perfect endings, but the real, raw and powerful stories that often go untold. In this episode, we talk about Krutika's career journey, accountancy training, what makes her human, and the motivations for establishing her own successful podcast. Hope you enjoy the episode.
Hi, Krutika, and welcome to the Human 2 podcast.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm excited.
I've been on your podcast, so the tables have turned now. And by the way, your podcast is absolutely brilliant, and we will get on to talking about that in a bit more detail later. But just for our watchers, could you give us a little bit of a breakdown of who you are and your career to date?
Thank you, Hannah, for plugging my podcast as well. I'm excited to be sharing a bit about that later on. But for those that are listening or watching and don't know who I am, my name's Krutika. I'll give you a little bit of context in terms of my upbringing and my background, because that might help you understand me a little bit better. I grew up in India. I was born in India. I was there till I was 6 years old. And then I moved to the UK, and I've been in the UK ever since. And I guess growing up in an immigrant household, the values of sort of hard work, getting a good education were very much deep rooted. That meant that as a student, I was very diligent. I enjoyed learning, so I did work hard at it, but I always felt grateful for the opportunity that I'd been afforded to actually live and study and be in the UK. Because where I was in India, it was a small town called Porbandar, which is only famously known for being the birthplace of Mahatma Gandhi. And I suppose the schooling there, and at the time anyway, I think it's improved a lot now, it wasn't the best. So having the opportunity to come and live and study in the UK, like I say, I never took it for granted. The other thing to sort of add is growing up in an Indian household, getting good grades. It's almost like a thing. You have to get the grades. It's also a bit of a running joke that, again, within an Indian household, there are 3 careers that are put on a pedestal above all else. You're either a doctor, you're a lawyer, or you're an accountant. Clearly, I went down the accounting route. But in terms of what led me to become an accountant, it was the fact that I was good at numbers. I did accounting at A level. And actually a bit of a misconception that, accounting is all about numbers. It really isn't. We can go into that as well. But, I was good at the accounting side of things when I did it at A level. It made sense for me to then go and do it at degree level. So I studied at Aston University, did an accounting degree. And I guess I was really fortunate in that my degree was a 4-year degree. It included a placement year. So I did get to work, in industry. I worked for Heinz during my placement year, which was an incredible experience. I graduated, and when I graduated, it was the year of the Lehman Brothers collapse. So it was in 2008 when the finance space was in a bit of turmoil, let's just say. So getting a graduate scheme and even getting into, accountancy and finance was a bit of a tough gig. And so I ended up taking a couple of months out just to go travel around in India. I went with my parents, stayed back in the town that I was from. And I came back and I sort of made a conscious decision to look for jobs more in smaller firms. A lot of the times when you kind of come out of an accountancy degree or any degree for that matter, and you're thinking about accountancy as a career, people might have aspirations to work for the Big Four or the Big Five or the Big 10. And I was slightly different in that I was like, you know what, I want to work in a smaller firm. I knew that was a better fit for me. So I trained with a smaller firm. I did my chartered qualification, and realized during that time that actually what I quite liked was training the juniors and passing on my knowledge. And that led me to then get a job at Kaplan, which was amazing. I worked there for about 6 and a bit years, taught various different accounting reporting modules, did a bit of management accounting, financial management teaching as well. Got involved in the content side of things, and that led me to sort of pivot into a career in ed tech where I was doing a bit of content creation. And that essentially then landed me my job at ACCA, which is where I'm currently at. And my title is that I'm a digital education delivery lead. That sounds like a mouthful, probably doesn't mean anything to your listeners, but in a nutshell, it means that I sort of lead a suite of online e-learning courses that are geared towards foundations and knowledge level of accountancy. And that's just an aspect of the role that I do. I get involved with loads of other interesting and exciting projects. So yeah, I guess that's a bit about me.
Thank you so much. It's really nice to have someone on who has gone pretty much straight into education by the sounds of it. How long were you qualified by the time you moved over to Kaplan?
It was pretty instant, Hannah. So I actually got my job at Kaplan before I'd even time qualified. So what had happened is, I sort of did my last batch of exams, found out that I'd passed those. And, at the time when I was studying for the last batch of advanced stage exams, I happened to be in the classroom after college, one of the college days, and I had huge admiration for the tutors there. And I just was chatting away to one of my corporate reporting tutors at the time. And, I was thinking, right, I really enjoy, like passing on knowledge. And she basically said to me that, hey, you could be a tutor at Kaplan without any kind of formal degree in teaching or education. And literally light bulbs went off. I was like, no way, you guys. Like, I was in such awe of the way that they delivered, and I genuinely thought that they all had some sort of teaching degree to accompany the accountancy stuff, but they didn't. And so she mentioned that, if you pass your exams, like, look out, there might be vacancies, and so that's exactly what I did. Once I got my grades after having passed my final batch of exams, I was like, oh, there's a vacancy for a tutor. Let me apply.
Mm.
And I did apply, and the recruitment process at Kaplan, to this day, I still feel it's the most scariest process ever, because part of the process includes you giving a presentation to tutors. And you can imagine when you are a student giving a presentation to a room of, and I think it was about 8 or 10 tutors. And these are tutors that, some of whom had taught me. I was
Yeah,
like, oh my God, this is so scary.
I
And
can yeah.
they try to simulate the classroom experience, Hannah. So they'll interrupt with questions, and it was just, it was a scary experience. I was glad to have gotten through those stages, and then at the end of it, they'd offered me the job. And I said to them, look, I'm not going to time qualify till sort of May, but they were like, yeah, not a problem. And so I went straight into it, Hannah, and I actually really enjoyed, like, it was fantastic.
Mm.
I was dead nervous. I remember my first teach being like, oh my God, they're going to catch me out with questions. But what I always had to remember is I do know more than the students that I'm teaching, because they are complete newbies at that stage. My very first teach was with a group of 40 KPMG students teaching financial accounting. And my God, that was scary, but I got through it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, something I've been trying to do with this podcast is kind of show the different careers that you can go into once you're a qualified accountant. And
Mm,
education is the one that doesn't come up quite as often. And it's a
mm,
brilliant route to go down. And as you say, you knew you loved imparting knowledge
yeah,
even at that early age. So,
yeah,
absolute perfect career. Now you've gone to work for the ACCA and you're involved in learning in a different way.
yeah,
So, yeah, I hope that our listeners will think, oh, that's actually a
yeah.
great go down.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you pointed that out, because this is it. I think when people look at accountancy as a career option, they think of it as a very linear route, right? That you train in practice or industry, wherever, and then you work your way up the ladder. You become a manager, you might become a director, maybe a partner. My career is anything but linear. It has been so squiggly, and yes, yeah, and this is it. And this is what we've got to really try and showcase to the generation that are thinking about career options, because this sounds like a bit of a sales pitch, maybe because I work at ACCA as well, but it is just recognizing that accountancy will open doors for you. And, it doesn't just have to be doors in the corporate space. I think about my career and what I've been able to do at ACCA, for example. I've been able to host the ACCA student podcast. Never in a million years did I think I'd be able to do that, and in 2024, when I got afforded that opportunity, I was like, oh my God, this is really cool. I managed to record and deliver 12 podcast episodes with the support of an incredible marketing team and all of that. And, that's not something you think accountants would do. You're hosting your own podcast as well, Hannah, right?
Yeah. We're creative people. We're creative.
Yes.
Creative accountants, sort
yes,
of.
exactly. We are breaking the mold,
Yeah, totally. Okay,
Yeah.
so I feel like you've kind of answered this question already. So, in your culture, it's very much lawyer, doctor, accountant, and you chose accountant because it sounds like, maths was your strength. So naturally, you kind of were leaning that way. Did you ever consider anything else? Or, were you just like, no, out of the three, accountancy is where I'm going to go?
Good question. Okay, so I mentioned I was very much a diligent student, and so I worked hard across all the various different subjects. And, doctor I ruled out pretty early on simply because I enjoyed it, but I knew I could not be a doctor because I'm just too emotional. I get, giving bad news to people, or when it comes to health, the sight of blood, I was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to thrive in that career. Lawyer, I did actually do law at A level, and I did enjoy it, but I don't know, the law route just didn't appeal to me as much. And, with accountancy, it was also knowing the financial security that it would afford for me. So I should have flagged, obviously, I mentioned I grew up in an immigrant household, and I guess financial security is something that plays a part, in when you're deciding what career option to go down. And accountancy, I just knew, right, if I get the qualification, it is just going to open up those doors. It's going to give me that security. I'll always have something that I can fall back on, So, yeah, I guess that was why I chose it. And like I say, numbers was my strength. And when I did accounting at A level, I just got the concepts, Hannah. You get, and having been in the classroom as well, I often came across, learners that would struggle to grasp the concepts. And, they're not easy concepts to grasp when you've done, like, let's say, a history degree or an English degree or an art degree. And part of what I enjoyed being a tutor was my ability to then have to think, right, how can I break this down to someone so they understand it? Whereas for me, when I was taught it, I was like, oh yeah, I get it. It just clicked. It sort of just made sense. I didn't have to overthink it. I got it. And so that just meant, oh yeah, okay, I'm gonna do okay at this because I've got it.
You're a natural accountant.
Yeah. But although I do say now I'm not a proper accountant because I don't think I've been in the practice of it enough. So yes, the theory and that I get, and I've taught it, but it is different when you're in the workplace, and obviously and you'll know this, Hannah, from your time, like every organization will approach things in a slightly different way. Yes, the fundamentals are there, but doing it in practice can be different. Yeah.
And yeah, I say I'm not really an accountant anymore as well. I mean, since I went into business consulting, I focused on people consulting. And now, I'm doing this 6-month consultancy role, which is more about people and organization change than anything else, but it's in a finance function. So it's very bizarre, but I don't know my debits and credits anymore.
But I don't think you need to anymore. I think AI's come doing all that for us now.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Anyway, move on to your own podcast, Journeys with Krutika. It's a podcast that touches on some really challenging topics like illness, cancer. I was talking about neurodivergence when you had me on. life changes, all sorts of heavy topics. And it's really interesting. You also speak to a lot of people from the South Asian community.
Mm.
How did you sort of decide to do this podcast, and what does it mean to you? And just before you answer that, with the Human Too podcast, I wanted to shine a light on the fact that accountants are human too. There's a human side to the industry. And when I was coming to crossroads in my career, I wanted something like this to show that there are so many different avenues you can go down. And also, if you fail exams, if you struggle with exams, it's normal and you can get through it. So they were my reasons for doing this. But what were your reasons for Journeys with Kritika?
And, firstly, thank you for sort of referencing my podcast. I'm trying to get better at also plugging it for myself. So for a bit of context, I sort of mentioned that I had the opportunity in 2024 to host the ACCA student podcast. It's a series called On Your Marks. And that was an incredible experience, Hannah. It really did put me out my comfort zone in the sense that I was in a studio. I was recording with, an incredible guest with an incredible team. And I really enjoyed that experience. It really got me thinking about communication. It got me thinking about listening skills, people skills, all of that. I happened to be on a walk at the back end of 2024, and I'm an avid podcast listener myself, Hannah. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. And a lot of the podcasts I listened to, I noticed had expert guests, guests that were successful in their own right, however you define success. And, they had lots of followings, they were very knowledgeable. And it just dawned on me that everyday people like you and I, we go through things. We have stories, we have wisdom to share, but we may not always have the platform to share it. And I'm not saying I am the platform that's offering that, but it was just an idea. And I came home and I mentioned it to my husband, and he was like, I think it's a good idea. Do something about it. Like, go and do it. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to research. So I found out how I could go about setting up my own podcast. I was researching RSS feeds, softwares I can use, and, how I'm going to launch it, socials and promoting it. And yeah, 2025, I launched with it. And my first episode is with my best friend who was diagnosed with mouth cancer. And she speaks candidly about her journey. And, it's something I'm doing outside of my corporate role. It's not related to accountancy at all, but it's helping me sort of just, hone certain skills that are so essential in everyday life. But at the same time, I'm hearing these incredible stories from everyday people that inspire me and that make me realize, we're all human. And that's exactly what you're trying to do with this. And what's been fantastic is I've also made some incredible connections with people that I might not have connected with. And I would love to get to a place where I can create a community where people can just be happy to share an aspect of their journey, not feel ashamed of it, or, maybe even share something they're passionate about, like you done when you sort of came on your podcast, in terms of what, on my podcast, when you came to share your sort of what you're doing with Accountancy Hub. And yeah, it's incredible. And I feel really fortunate that I've been able to speak with some incredible guests. My podcast is not about me. It's always about the guests that I'm talking to and offering that safe space for them to share whatever it is that they want to share. And, especially coming from that Indian background, Hannah, emotions and heavy topics, they aren't always discussed in an open forum. So things are often brushed under the carpet, and so what's been nice with my podcast is that I have had guests from that sort of South Asian Indian background sharing things that, it's just breaking the mold. It's kind of breaking down those taboo topics. And it's things like divorce, things like separation when you're in your 50s, and infertility and all of that, which just doesn't get spoken about. So, yeah.
Honestly, it's so brilliant. And, it should be spoken about more. And do you think that that's going to change in the South Asian Indian community, as the years go by? Has it changed a lot in your lifetime? Or are we still at a stage where, no, all these topics are still taboo, and it's things like your podcast that really have to kind of break the mold?
I think over the years, definitely there has been a bit of change, but even if I think about, my own kind of family and the older generation, the older members of my family, there are still certain things that we don't perhaps talk about. And it's because it's just a generational thing, again, going back to that kind of immigrant mentality. It's like, get up and go. We should be talking about emotions. There's other things to be thinking about, and it's that. So maybe it's a generational thing. I think that the youngsters sort of coming in, emotions and all of that, spoken about a bit more. But yeah, maybe for those that are slightly older, it doesn't come to them as easy. And I guess you've got to have a certain level of self-awareness as well, Hannah, to kind of recognize emotions as well. So yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope I'm making a difference in some way, shape, or form, but I don't want to claim that I am at this point.
No,
Um,
definitely. I think anything makes a difference. And you won't even know how you are impacting one listener here and there, another listener there. We don't have a massive following on this podcast, but now and again, someone will get in touch, and I know that they do for you as well, to say sort of, "Oh, I really love listening to that podcast because I've gone through my own struggles in this or that." And I mean, that just makes it worth it, doesn't it?
yeah, absolutely. It absolutely does. And I have received some really lovely feedback from my listeners. And I guess that's what keeps you going in a weird way, because you realize, okay, well, even if I'm not reaching the masses yet, and actually I have never with my podcast set myself a goal of, oh, I want to get this many listens or I want to get this many followers, because I do often think that if you set yourself goals like that, you will you won't enjoy the journey and you'll be fixating on hitting those metrics. Whereas for me, I'm trying to, enjoy the journey. Like I say, improve certain selfishly skills for myself. I think listening, communication, all that is helping me in the workplace as well. So, yeah, and when I do get the feedback and when I do get listeners saying, oh, that was a really good episode, really enjoyed that, or I learned this from that. And I've had some lovely comments, on Spotify and Apple as well, for some of the episodes. It's just nice. It's just really nice knowing that you're making a difference. And Hannah, you do a very similar thing for what you're setting out as your vision for Accountancy Hub, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But now we're gonna talk about your journey. I want to know how you would describe the journey that you're on at the moment.
Hannah, I feel like one of my guests on my own podcast with this question. Now
Sorry.
I know what they feel like. No, do you know, that's a good question, and I think the honest answer is I'm on a journey of figuring it out. I don't think I've figured out life, and I don't think that's a bad thing either. I'm on a journey of I'm exploring. Like even if I think about my personal journey with the podcast, I'm exploring. I am exploring what it is to be a podcast host, how it is to ask the right questions when you're having a considered conversation with someone that's been through something difficult, having compassion in the way that you ask those questions. So that's been a bit of exploration. And, I was listening to, do you listen to Diary of a CEO, Hannah, by Steve
I
Bartlett?
used to quite avidly, but I haven't really listened to it for a long time, but I see all the snippets on social media. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, he had an episode recently with a chap called Tony Robbins, who I didn't know much about. But anyway, Tony said something on the episode where he was like, as humans, we're made to be creators. And, I was like, that's absolutely true, because what I'm trying to do a bit more now is create, and not just with my podcast, but I also have this alias social media page, which is called Taste and Travel with Kay, where I just plug and I share my food, travel, and experiences. And I never show my face on it. And again, I only kind of set that up a couple of years ago. I don't have a massive following, but I love the creative process of stitching together a video that captures my memories from my eyes with what I've experienced, whether it's food or, a nice experience that I've had, or a nice hotel that I've stayed at, or a holiday that I've been on. And, speaking of which, coming back to sort of the exploration piece, my husband and I have been fortunate that we've traveled around quite a bit post-COVID. And, you know, we had the opportunity to go to the Masai Mara in Kenya, and we did a safari, which was incredible. We've been to Bali. We've recently just booked Japan. So I guess a true explorer in that sense, and just figuring out life. I think my journey is just about figuring things out, trying new things. And I'm one of those people that's okay to quit. And that might seem a bit strong, but you know, when I mentioned my alias social media page, Taste and Travel with Kay, but I initially started that to share recipes because I love food. And I actually put out quite a few videos where I would film myself cooking something. And it was never my face, like I say, it was always a view of what I was doing. And then I got bored of that. And I was like, no, I'm going to make a pivot, and I'm actually going to capture food that I eat when I go out and experiences that I have. And so I pivoted to that. So I'm absolutely okay to figure things out, see what works, see what doesn't, call it quits when it's time to call it quits, basically.
I mean, that is innovation, isn't it? Like any failures, it's just lessons. And like, if you don't enjoy it, do something else. And it's amazing to have that outlet that you sometimes don't have in your day job. And I'm totally with you. I love the creativity. You know, the creativity that went into creating Accountancy Hub just brought me to life. It sounds like it's, you know, totally the same with you. And I've noticed you are really good at social media. When you do those reels, you've got the knack for social media, I can tell.
Hannah, honestly, thank you for saying that. And, you know, it's funny because with social media, I have this thing where I like the creation aspect, but you know what it is? The algorithms as a content creator, it just keeps telling you to create more and more. And that's the struggle I have, like striking that balance, because I'm someone that I was off social media for quite a long time. And that was partly because I'd read this book called Zucked by Richard, what's his name? Robert McNamee, I think it is. I might be getting his first name wrong. But anyway, the author of that book, he was one of the very early investors in Facebook. And there's a chapter in that book where he talks about the way that these platforms are designed to get you hooked. You know, right from the way that the notifications appear, the color of the red, the introduction of the like feature, for example. And when I educated myself about, you know, the way that these platforms are designed to hook you in, I almost felt like, gosh, I don't want to be controlled by the platforms. I want to have that control in terms of how I use it and what I want to do with it. And so when I then like deactivated all my social media accounts for a few years and I came back on making very conscious decisions in terms of what I was going to do on those platforms. And so when I create content, you know, you see all this clickbaity stuff, and there's elements of having to tap into that if you want to get your content out there. But what I don't want to do is for anyone that is following me to feel like they have to constantly be on my page. And so I am not so great at posting constantly or posting regularly enough. But it's funny, it's a weird one, isn't it, Hannah? And I don't know if you find this with what you do. Like, do you feel not the pressure, but the need to want to put things out because you're trying to create something and you need to get it out to the masses? But how do you strike that balance?
Yeah. And especially if it's not your full-time job. Now, Accountancy Hub has been my full focus at different points in the last 2 years because but sometimes I'm doing a 4-day-a-week job and I only really have 1 day a week to focus on Accountancy Hub. I'm desperately trying to build this community. So yes, there is a pressure to post a lot, but then I think it is quality over quantity. So I think, you know, what you do, I think you post less often, but it's interesting what you do post, high quality. So that's a good way of doing it. Going back to kind of figuring out life, do you think we'll ever have it figured out? Or do you think it's just going to be a whole life of figuring?
Very good question. I think it's probably going to be a whole life of figuring because, you know, Hannah, we go through so many different stages in life, isn't it? You know, when you're in your 20s, you're a totally different person to your 30s. And I don't want to give away my age to the audience, but I'm now reaching another decade of my life. So
you cannot be going into your 40s, Krutika. You can't.
Yeah.
You look about 28. Oh my gosh.
I just think you almost have to be figuring it out at all stages in your life, because the point that you have it figured out, are you then growing and learning? I don't know. Maybe I will just be figuring it. I want to know, if have you figured it out? Do you think you've got life sussed?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But the journey has been the best
Yeah.
bit about the last 2 years. And
Yeah.
so, like, living in the moment and,
Yeah.
very cheesy, isn't it? Like, enjoy the journey, not the destination. But
Yeah.
it has made me do that in the last 2 years. When I was in corporate and, I was studying for exams, it was always like, you've got to pass this next exam and then you've got to get a promotion and you've got to be really good at your job and
Mm.
sort of treadmill, treadmill, treadmill. But the last 2 years for me have been enjoyable, figuring stuff out, trying things that are new. I've loved
Yeah.
it.
And that's the thing that we've got to remember, right? And when you are learning something new or doing something different that puts you a little bit out your comfort zone, those are the moments that you really have to enjoy and embrace the challenge, however difficult that might be. And yeah, I think it's incredible what you've built, Hannah. I know you referred to, or you don't have a big following at the moment, but you certainly have a big enough following, Hannah, and what you've been able to achieve as well, like the support that you're giving to students. And shining a spotlight on the fact that accountancy is not just one thing. It is so many different things, so many different like career routes that you can kind of go into. Yeah, it is. I refer to it as, it is the springboard that lets you jump into whatever it is that you want to jump into, because you get the essential skills that's just going to set you up for life. And I don't know if you felt that, like, even with what you've set up with Human too, I'm sure you're leveraging a lot of the things that you learned through your qualification, albeit in a slightly different way.
Totally. And a trainee got in touch with Accountancy Hub yesterday and we had
Mm.
a consultation and she said that she listens to the Human 2 podcast when she's at work. And she mentioned a few of the episodes and she said she really liked the Lad Bible one because one day she really wants to work for a cool company like Lad Bible. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is why I do the podcast. And it'll be just the same for
Amazing.
you.
Yeah.
It's inspiring them in some way. And so it's a great feeling, selfishly for us, isn't it?
But this is it. And but it's recognizing that, isn't it? You got to engage in what makes you light up, right? Whatever that might be. But no, lovely for your trainee to get in touch and refer to that episode, Hannah. Yeah.
Definitely. So this podcast is all about accountants being human too. So Kritika, what makes you human?
Oh, and again, this is such a good question. And it's one of those that really makes you think, because, and I know you've asked this to your guest previously, so I was almost primed and prepped for, she's probably going to ask me this at some point. And what is the answer to say?
No one can escape the question.
I know. And it's such a brilliant question. I guess we could go down the route of saying, well, what makes humans distinctly different, right? We're sentient beings. We feel things, we have emotions, but what sets us apart, and I'm sure there are other species that might be feeling things, but it's our ability to communicate it. That's what sets us apart. Now, if I think about myself specifically around that, yes, I feel things, and I think I feel things very deeply, but I've always been someone that's, and this might sound a little bit egotistical, but I hope it doesn't come across as that. I feel I'm very empathetic to, I'm very in tune with other people's emotions, and I think I have been for the longest time. Any interaction or conversation that I have, I'd like to think I have the ability to really understand the perspective and the point of view of the other person. And maybe in some respects, that's why I've really enjoyed what I do with my podcast. And I've had the feedback that often refers to, oh my God, you navigated that conversation so compassionately. And that's because I think I got that ability to just put myself in the other person's shoes, to think, what are they going through? What would be the right thing to ask here, at that point? So maybe what makes me human is the empathy, and yeah, I'm not sure that comes as easy to everyone. I mean, is that something that comes easy for you, Hannah? Like, or the people that you know around you?
Yes, and I think people have said that I'm very empathetic in the past. I loved it when
Mm,
you said you feel things deeply. I'm a person that feels things deeply.
mm,
I really
yeah,
am.
yeah.
And I cry at music, I cry at TV adverts, I cry at
Mm,
dramas. I can't watch anything too sort of gory and horrible because I just feel anxious for the next 24 hours.
mm, yeah.
Coffee delivery.
Lovely.
Um, so yeah, I relate to that feeling deeply thing. And I
Yeah,
think that can affect you at work. So I want to turn that back on you. How does that
yeah.
affect you in your corporate professional life, feeling deeply?
You're right. You're absolutely right. It does. And this is something that is a bit of a battle for me, Hannah, because it often means that in some situations, I'm guilty of potentially thinking so much about the other person that I do it at the expense of how I feel or what I want to convey at that point in time, because I'm thinking, I don't want to upset the other person, or I don't want to say something that might not be the right thing to say at that point in time. And I guess that also perhaps ties in with being a bit of a people pleaser, and yeah, it's obviously that feeling of wanting to be liked. Yes, that comes into people pleasing, but for me, it's often just, oh, I just don't want to upset the other person. I don't want to say the wrong thing, so it can be a bit of a challenge. I do manage a team, and I have a wonderful team. I'm fortunate of that, but I am always so in tune about what is it that they want, and how can I make this better for them? So yeah, it can be a challenge, and I don't think I have an answer for it. I'm figuring it out.
Absolutely. And I'm the same. I'm a massive people pleaser. And
Mm,
I think it's a defense mechanism. I think it's a way to avoid conflict. And
yeah,
actually, sometimes, well, I was going to say conflict is a good thing. I'm not sure conflict is a good thing, but having challenging conversations, if you're in a leadership position and you're a manager, and you're managing other people, you've got to have those challenging conversations,
yeah,
haven't you?
yeah.
You can't always just be nice. I don't know if you follow, God, I can't speak. If you follow Heather, Leadership Heather on
No, I've
social
not.
media. Oh, she's brilliant. You need to follow her.
Hey.
She's all about be kind, not nice. And
Yes,
kindness is very
yeah.
different. That means that you can have those difficult conversations with people. You can stick up
Mhm,
for yourself.
mhm.
It's not about being nice. What do you
Yeah,
think about that?
that's a really good point, and I think that, yeah, it's a work in progress for me. And kindness actually is one of those values that I really do kind of live by. And maybe sometimes it's a case of, yeah, I'll go into something and maybe overthink or over prep the way that I want to deliver it. And I want to be at a position where that's not something I'm taking so much capacity and space doing, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, absolutely. Being kind rather than thinking about nice, because there is a way to do it. I've heard someone say, if somebody had something stuck on their teeth, being nice would be you not telling them, but being kind would be you saying, "Hey, by the way, you've got a bit of broccoli stuck on your teeth," you know? And 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 I, that's the way that I sort of see that distinction between nice and kind. And I'm trying to, I guess in the work context, get better at doing that. I haven't quite figured things out, but I might follow this Heather leader person
Leadership
that you've sort of
Heather.
mentioned. Yeah,
Yeah, she's
yeah,
brilliant.
yeah,
I also think, as I sort of, it's strange because I am crawling up the leadership ladder, but in a very strange, squiggly way. And
yeah,
my last role was chief of staff, and it
yeah.
felt senior. I was working with all the senior leadership team and very closely with the CEO. And conflict is just part of the work experience, on a minor level. People are disagreeing, and actually that's what you want. You want diversity of thought. You don't want a room full of people going, "Yes, yes, let's do that. Yes, definitely." You want that sort of push and pull. But I think for someone like me who really doesn't like conflict, actually it's tough to be like, actually, no, I disagree with you. I don't think that that's right. I think we should do
Yeah.
this instead.
It's the words. You know what it is? Because maybe, Hannah, we're overthinkers. I wouldn't be able to just go in and say, I disagree. I would almost pad it out with so many extra words that then I sort of almost undervalue like what I'm about to sort of say. So I'm trying to make more conscious efforts about the choice of words that we use. And I don't know if you feel this also, maybe being a female in certain situations as well.
Definitely.
Women are known to kind of not have the confidence, not as much confidence as perhaps males might embody in certain situations.
Mm,
And so we make ourselves feel a little bit sort of smaller, or use words like, "Oh, maybe I think we should do this," rather than sort of asserting, "I've observed that this is happening, and so we should go ahead and do this." It's just that phrasing, right?
totally.
Yeah,
Why do we have to kind of change our wording to make others feel comfortable all the time?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but then I was speaking to my friends about this recently, and they said to me, Hannah, you're quite scary. Like, you can be scary. And that kind
Really?
yeah, I was like, "Mm, okay." But I think I am what I've got, I'm making this podcast about myself now, aren't I? But
No, no,
um,
no. It's great. It's a two-way conversation,
the two-way
Hannah.
conversation.
Yes.
I think I'm quite good if I really strongly passionate about something, I can't let it go.
Yeah.
If it affects my ethics or my values or my morals, then I am quite stern about things,
Mm,
which I don't think is a bad thing.
yeah. No, absolutely. You've got to be. I think, and that's a similar thing with me. Like there are certain values that I do hold, in the workplace. And kindness being sort of one of them, the way that I approach people, no matter who they are, those sort of things. And if you do believe in something, you got to push for it. But it's just, yeah, you can you can assert an opinion, or a viewpoint in a polite way without it sort of coming across aggressive, or without making somebody else feel shit about themselves. There's no other way to put it. But I don't think that's a skill that comes easily. It's got to be something you've got to really think about. And yeah, I'm still learning. But it needs to be spoken about because, your podcast is about being human. And I think all of these emotions, this is what makes us human. Do you know, I like coming back to the cry. I have cried in the workplace. And, I remember, was it a few years back, I ended up having a bit of a meltdown in front of one of the heads. And I was apologizing profusely because it was just one of those days I was having where I had so much to deal with, and then there was questions being asked, and I was like, "Oh, I can't." Oh. And I just broke down, and then I was apologizing. And actually, the loveliest thing happened because, this head turned around and said, Please don't apologize. Like, it's not necessary. It's a completely normal reaction to the situation. And that just, and that's fine. We've got to realize that, yes, in the corporate workspace, there is a certain level of professionalism that's required. But at the same time, people have lives outside of work. People are dealing with stuff when they're at work. And so just recognizing that a lot of these emotions are going to be part of, yeah, day-to-day things should be okay. So, yeah, I
Totally,
think it's good to
totally.
spotlight. Yeah.
It is, it is. If you were to go back in time and
Mm,
have a cup of tea with your younger
yeah.
self, maybe during that training period, so when you were sitting your exams, what would
Mm.
you, and you're working at your firm, what would you say to young Kritika when you were having that cup of tea?
Oh, do you know, Hannah, I was a bit of a stress head as well when I was doing my exams. And I had a meltdown before advanced stage exams. I would just say, it's going to be okay. And you know what? You don't need to get any more than 50%. Just aim for that 50. Because again, and I don't know if you've had this, a lot of people that come into the accountancy space, they tend to be high achievers, and they tend to want to get, the sort of 70, 80%, 90%. And you know what? You only need 50% to pass. And there was a lot of pressure I put on myself, circling all the way back to what I said in the beginning, coming from an Indian household, good grades was everything. It wasn't just the 50%, we need to get 90%, so it's kind of thinking it's okay. Get that 50%. You're going to get it. You're going to be absolutely fine. Yeah, I think that's what I'd say.
That is such a good one. And I think this is why when I failed exams, I took it so hard, because it's kind of like, I can't even get 50%. What is this? I can't even get 50%. This has never happened in my entire life.
No, but Hannah, I think what people don't realise is that there's a reason the pass mark is 50%, because these exams, being brutally honest, it's not rocket science, right? If you had all the time in the world, you could understand it and you can get, the really high grades. But often you're doing the studying and the working simultaneously. So you're managing perhaps a job, you're studying, you might at that point have other commitments. You might have a family, you might have young kids you're looking after, you might be caring for others. There could be a whole load of things. So it's slightly different to, when you're at university where the only focus is the studying. Here, you're not just studying, you might be doing other things. And it's striking that balance. And I think I struggled with that, working a corporate job 9 to 5 and then having to study in the evenings when you're already probably brain dead from a really tough day at work. So trying to then just figure out like what works for you. And I quickly realized I'm a morning person. So I would wake up at, 5 o'clock in the morning, do an hour and a bit before I actually went into work, which sounds crazy, but that just meant that I was in a very good position and felt like, okay, I've already done a bit of studying. So if I come home after work and I can't do anything, I didn't feel too bad because it was like I'd already got a bit of studying in. So figuring out what works for you, it's and yeah, there's just the syllabus is just too big. You can't possibly like be an expert in every learning outcome in the syllabus. It's just not possible.
Definitely. I think it's all
Yeah.
about technique, isn't it? How can you just get over that 50% in the best way possible when you might be sitting 3 at a time while doing a full-time job, while
There you
having
go.
stuff going on in your personal life, as you say, caring
Mm.
responsibilities, neurodivergence, physical
Mm.
illnesses, whatever it might be. And I mean, I know I go on about this all the time, but I just don't think firms are supportive enough for all of those different things
Yeah.
that are happening
Yeah.
when
You're
training
absolutely.
to study.
Yeah, you're right. And I think, with what you're kind of doing and the vision you're setting out, there are changes that are being made, but you're absolutely right. It's a system that doesn't cater to those that, operate in a more unique way, like, or in a slightly different way. Because even when I was a tutor at Kaplan, Hannah, I would be delivering a 5 or 7 day financial accounting course, and at the end of it, expecting all the learners to have understood everything in the syllabus. It's intense. And I remember I did an accounting degree, as I mentioned, so I actually had an exemption from the earlier exams. But the firm that I trained with, the staff partner at the time, was adamant that I still attend college for that, even though I wasn't going to sit the exam, simply because it was so foundational to what I would be doing in the workplace. And I remember sitting in the classroom thinking, oh my God, these 7 days are the equivalent of like 2 years at A level. Like, I kid you not. It was literally everything I'd learned over 2 years at A level was what they were teaching. And, it's intense. So,
That's
yeah,
shocking. That is
yeah,
shocking. But
yeah,
also,
it was a lot of content.
really good that they made you sit
Yeah.
and have that kind of refresher, because I know people at my firm, they would have all these exemptions, they
Mm,
wouldn't go to college, but then they would really struggle going straight in at this higher
yeah.
level.
Yeah. And this is why, one of the perks of being in a smaller firm, right? Not that it's a critique, but if you go for the big four, for example, you might feel like a cog in a big machine. Whereas for me at my firm, you know, they only needed to think about me. And I think there were a couple of other people that were doing exams, but they were at different stages. And so there was that kind of, okay, yeah, we have the budget for you to just go to college and kind of work through the content, even though you're not sitting the exam. And actually, Hannah, what I also remember is when I joined, the first few accounts preparation and the accounts that I was preparing, the staff partner made me use the manual ledger papers, which to some of your listeners who are very young and aren't used to the manual ledgers, I'll be thinking, what? But I did my first, I think it was 5 or 6, I've even been up to 10 clients. He made me do the extended trial balance on the ledger paper. And that was before I accessed the system, because he was so keen for me to fully understand what was going on and didn't just want me to go straight to the system, because then the system's I'm just entering the numbers and the system's just populating the trial balance for me. He was like, no, I want you to do it on the ledger paper. And to this day, I think that really helped cement the theory in my mind, like to no end, because I was using an old school approach, but then understanding how it would then work on the system, so.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think we can translate that into AI now. We still need to have that understanding. We can't just say, oh, AI is
Yeah.
going to do it, so we don't need to bother with those exams. But we still need to
No.
understand how
Yeah.
it's working at
Yeah.
the basic level to be able to see what AI is shooting out at the end and know that it's correct. What
Yeah.
is your view on AI and the accounts?
Oh, that's a big question. You know what I keep seeing in the news and in media is like, AI is going to take over like all the jobs, and they keep listing out accountants and bookkeeping. Okay, yeah, in some respects, stuff that can be automated and feels a bit manual, yeah, AI is going to do that. But I don't think that's a bad thing, because, circling back to what we were saying about accountancy isn't just numbers. There is so much more. A lot of it is using the numbers to help with decision making. There's a lot of, skills involved there. We're thinking about having commercial acumen, problem solving, attention to detail, communication skills, all of that. AI isn't quite there with some of that. It really isn't. So it's not that AI is going to be taking over our jobs. I think we should view it as someone that knows how to use the AI to support their role. They're going to be taking your job, And so AI is going to be here. I'm working on a couple of AI projects even at work, and I'm someone who's very pro tech. I love technology. I always embrace new changes that come about in technology. But I do think that we should just strip back the layers and really think, okay, what is this technology going to help us with? And how can we work with it to really optimize and make our jobs the most efficient they can be? And some of the automated stuff, yes, that will go. But like you say, Hannah, we're still going to need to know the basics of how things are being done. The other thing to realize is that a lot of people also use the word AI quite flippantly at the moment. We think about there's different types of AI. Generative AI technologies, they've become a lot more mainstream, but AI at its core has been around for a little while. Machine learning and algorithms, that is all part of AI. And so, we really need to kind of also distinguish the different types of AI. And how they can sort of help us. So, yeah, I think it's an exciting space if we embrace it and we embrace it in the right way. But it's also about knowing that there are drawbacks, there are limitations, and it's not going to fully take over everyone's jobs, you know.
I'm sure
Yeah.
that'll be reassuring to a trainee listening to this.
Yeah,
Keep going, don't give up now.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Krutika. It's been a pleasure speaking to you on this podcast, and thanks for being so honest and open about your own journey. If you're watching, listening to this, go and check out Journeys with Krutika. You are a brilliant host. You are very empathetic and you navigate those conversations very, very well. So thank you so much. And I hope this isn't our last conversation. Maybe we can have another podcast episode at some point, because I've loved it.
I've loved it too. Thank you. And it's felt so easy as well. It really has just been a conversation. And, I think I mentioned before we hit record, I was a little bit nervous being on the other side of the mic, but you're a natural as well, Hannah, and I've absolutely loved it. And thank you so much for also spotlighting what I do outside my corporate role. And yeah, I love what I'm doing with Journeys with Krutika, and thank you for plugging it once again and for having me.
You're more than welcome.